The KRYX arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, their crystalline ships refracting sunlight across Earth's cities in dazzling prismatic displays. To the casual observer, it might have seemed beautiful, if not for the mass communications blackout that preceded their appearance. Their vessels hung in geometric formations, each one a perfect dodecahedron of transparent crystal that seemed to pulse with internal energy. Commander Serix of the KRYX expansion fleet stood at the helm of the flagship, their crystalline form catching and splitting light into rainbow patterns across the bridge. To them, this was merely another primitive world to add to their vast empire, one that still relied on crude rocket technology and fossil fuels. Their preliminary scans had detected no energy shields, no quantum weapons, not even basic antimatter drives. Just another organic species waiting to be harvested and processed into useful resources. "Begin the standard conquest protocol," Serix commanded, their voice resonating through the crystal chambers of the ship. "Deploy the entropy fields." The KRYX had conquered 17 worlds using this same strategy. Their entropy fields would accelerate the decay of organic matter, causing all biological technology to fail within hours. It was elegant, efficient, and had never failed them before. The fields deployed, spreading out in perfectly calculated patterns across Earth's major population centers. Serix waited for the usual panic, the desperate attempts at resistance, the eventual surrender. Instead, their sensors detected something unprecedented: the humans were adapting. In New Delhi, engineers had already noticed that old vacuum tube technology remained unaffected by the entropy fields. In Tokyo, scientists quickly discovered that analog systems continued to function perfectly. And in Silicon Valley, tech companies were rapidly switching their servers to optical computing systems that used light rather than electricity. "Impossible," Serix muttered, their crystalline form vibrating with confusion. "They cannot adapt this quickly. It defies all known parameters." But the humans weren't finished surprising them. When the KRYX deployed their ground forces, towering crystalline constructs designed to inspire terror, they encountered resistance in forms they had never anticipated. In Russia, elderly radio operators used ancient shortwave sets to coordinate guerrilla strikes. In Brazil, indigenous tribes guided military units through rainforest paths that confused the KRYX's geometric navigation systems. In Nigeria, engineers jury-rigged solar panels to power makeshift electromagnetic pulse devices. The KRYX had expected a brief, orderly conquest. Instead, they found themselves facing a species that seemed to thrive on chaos and improvisation. Their perfectly calculated battle plans crumbled against the unpredictable nature of human resistance. "They're using projectile weapons," reported one of Serix's lieutenants, their voice carrying tones of disbelief. "Primitive chemical explosives and metal projectiles." "Irrelevant," Serix dismissed. "Our crystalline forms are impervious to such crude attacks." But again, the humans proved them wrong. They had quickly discovered that while the KRYX's crystalline bodies were nearly indestructible, they had distinct resonant frequencies. Amateur musicians in London were the first to notice how certain sound frequencies made the crystal warriors vibrate uncomfortably. Within days, humanity had weaponized sound itself. As the first week of invasion drew to a close, Serix faced an uncomfortable reality. Their entropy fields, while still functioning perfectly, had failed to cripple human resistance. Instead, humanity had simply reverted to older technologies, adapting their tactics faster than the KRYX could respond. Their perfect crystalline technology, evolved over millennia, was being challenged by a species that still hadn't achieved faster-than-light travel. "This is a tactical anomaly," Serix announced to their command staff. "We must adjust our approach. These humans are operating outside of all known parameters for a pre-spacefaring civilization." But even as they spoke, humans were discovering more weaknesses in the supposedly perfect KRYX technology. The crystalline ships, while incredibly durable, couldn't handle rapid temperature changes. Earth's militaries began developing weapons that would flash heat then flash freeze sections of the KRYX vessels, creating stress fractures in their seemingly impervious hulls. The first major defeat came when a combined force of South Korean and Japanese engineers deployed a network of modified semiconductor manufacturing lasers. The precisely calibrated beams didn't damage the KRYX ships, they simply excited the crystal structure in exactly the right way to disrupt their internal communication networks. 3 KRYX battleships fell from the sky over the Pacific, their perfect geometric forms shattering on impact with the ocean. As Cerix watched their carefully constructed invasion plans crumble, they experienced something entirely new to their species: doubt. The humans weren't fighting according to any rational strategy they could discern. They were adapting, evolving, changing tactics minute by minute. It was chaos, but chaos with a purpose. "Send the report to High Command," Cerix finally ordered, their crystalline form dimming slightly. "The preliminary invasion has encountered complications. We require new protocols." But even as they sent the message, Cerix knew that no existing protocol would be sufficient. They had made a fundamental error in their initial assessment of Earth. They had seen the humans' technological limitations as weakness, their diversity as a flaw, their unpredictability as a disadvantage. Now, as they watched their perfect crystalline warriors falling to improvised sonic weapons and jury-rigged lasers, they realized their mistake. The humans weren't primitive at all. They were something far more dangerous, adaptable. The KRYX had expected warfare to follow logical, predictable patterns. Their battles across 17 worlds had always proceeded according to carefully calculated protocols. But on Earth, they found themselves facing something that defied their crystalline logic: human creativity in combat. "They're using their own atmospheric pollution against us," reported Scout Crystal Nexix, their form flickering with agitation. "The humans have discovered that the particulate matter in their industrial regions interferes with our light-based communications." Commander Cerix absorbed this information with growing unease. The humans had turned their own technological limitations into advantages. In the smog-filled industrial centers of China, KRYX formations found themselves cut off and surrounded. Their perfect crystalline forms, designed to channel and amplify communication beams, were instead scattering signals through the polluted air. But it wasn't just environmental factors that humans were weaponizing. They had begun to understand the fundamental nature of their crystalline adversaries, and with understanding came innovation. In university laboratories across the globe, scientists had noticed that the KRYX's crystalline technology operated on principles of perfect order and symmetry. The humans' response? Chaos. Beautiful, calculated chaos. In the deserts of Nevada, a team of musicians and physicists collaborated to create what they called entropy orchestras, massive arrays of speakers that played mathematically designed discordant frequencies. The sounds weren't meant to shatter the KRYX, they were designed to introduce minute imperfections into their crystalline structure, creating accumulated stress that would lead to eventual failure. "They're not just fighting us," Cerix realized, watching another formation fall to seemingly primitive tactics. "They're understanding us. Learning us. Unmaking us." The humans had also discovered that the KRYX's geometric ship formations weren't merely aesthetic choices. The vessels arranged themselves in patterns that created resonant energy fields, amplifying their power. So humanity adapted again. Civilian drone hobbyists, coordinating with military strategists, developed swarm tactics that disrupted these formations with seemingly random movements. "Their attacks make no sense," complained Tactical Crystal Verix. "There is no pattern, no logic to their deployments. How can we counter what we cannot predict?" But there was logic, human logic. While the KRYX sought perfect patterns, humans embraced controlled disorder. They had learned through millennia of warfare against themselves that unpredictability was often the greatest weapon of all. In the mountains of Afghanistan, tribal warriors who had never seen a computer-guided special forces teams through ancient smuggling routes, outflanking KRYX positions that relied on geometric patrol patterns. In the Amazon rainforest, indigenous trackers taught NATO forces how to move through the chaotic natural environment in ways that confused the KRYX's rigid scanning systems. The greatest shock came from the world's hackers and programmers. The KRYX had dismissed Earth's digital technology as primitive, but they hadn't counted on human ingenuity. Teams of programmers discovered that while they couldn't hack the KRYX's crystalline computers directly, they could introduce visual patterns that created processing errors in their optical computing systems. "They're using cat videos," reported an incredulous analysis crystal. Somehow, the random movements of these small felines, when displayed in large numbers, create feedback loops in our processing matrices. Syrinx would have laughed if their species were capable of it. The humans were defeating their perfect technology with pictures of pets, with noise that shouldn't matter, with tactics that should never work. Every weakness, no matter how minor, was being explored and exploited. The KRYX's standard combat protocols called for escalation in the face of resistance. But how does one escalate against an enemy that turns each escalation into a new opportunity? When they deployed larger crystal ships, the humans used the vessel's increased surface area to greater effect with their temperature differential weapons. When they tried to adapt to sonic attacks, the humans switched to electromagnetic pulses, then back to sonics, then to something else entirely. "We are fighting a species that turned their own technological inadequacies into strengths," Syrinx announced to the High Command. "They take our perfect systems and find imperfect ways to defeat them. Their primitive nature is not a weakness, it is a source of solutions we cannot predict." The humans had begun calling it crystalline warfare, but it wasn't warfare as the KRYX understood it. It was innovation, adaptation, and constant change. The KRYX had evolved to be perfect, unchanging crystals. The humans, in contrast, had evolved to be imperfect but endlessly adaptable. As the second month of the invasion drew to a close, Syrinx faced an uncomfortable truth: the art of war, as practiced by humans, wasn't an art of perfection. It was an art of evolution, of constant change, of finding ways to win with whatever tools were at hand. The KRYX had spent millennia becoming the perfect warriors. The humans had spent millennia learning to overcome their imperfections, and in doing so, had become something far more dangerous. "Begin tactical withdrawal from population centers," Syrinx finally ordered. "We must reassess our entire approach to this conflict." But even as they gave the order, they knew it might be too late. The humans weren't just fighting back, they were learning, adapting, and growing stronger with each engagement. The perfect crystalline empire was being defeated by a species that embraced imperfection as a strength. The KRYX had based their invasion strategy on one fundamental assumption about human nature, that under pressure, Earth's divided nations would turn against each other. It was a logical conclusion drawn from humanity's long history of conflict. But as Commander Syrinx watched the unfolding events from their flagship, they witnessed something unprecedented. "The humans are sharing their discoveries," reported Information Crystal Lyrics, their structure pulsing with confusion. "Every weakness they find in our systems, every effective countermeasure, they're distributing this knowledge globally, freely, to anyone who can use it." It had started small. A team of researchers in Mumbai discovered that certain configurations of crystal refraction could disrupt KRYX targeting systems. Instead of keeping this advantage for India, they immediately uploaded their findings to a new global defense network. Within hours, resistance groups worldwide were implementing and improving upon their discovery. The scientific community had completely abandoned traditional research protocols. Peer review now happened in real time across social media platforms. When a high school physics teacher in Buenos Aires noticed that KRYX crystals exhibited unusual properties under specific magnetic conditions, her TikTok video reached quantum physicists in Beijing within minutes. "They're not just cooperating," Syrinx observed. "They're synergizing. Each human group contributes its unique perspective, creating solutions we could never anticipate." The KRYX watched in growing alarm as former enemy nations pooled their resources. Russian aerospace engineers worked alongside American quantum computing experts. Iranian cybersecurity specialists collaborated with Israeli AI researchers. The humans had found a common purpose that transcended their ancient rivalries. But it wasn't just governments and scientists who were uniting. The invasion had triggered something deep in human collective consciousness, a recognition that their differences, long seen as weaknesses, could become extraordinary strengths when properly combined. Traditional healers from indigenous tribes began consulting with modern medical researchers, leading to breakthroughs in understanding how to repair crystal-damaged organic tissue. Street artists collaborated with military strategists, using urban art installations to create visual disruption patterns that confused KRYX targeting systems. Their cultural database is expanding exponentially, warned Analysis Crystal Merrick's. They're not just learning about our weaknesses, they're learning from each other, combining knowledge systems we wouldn't have thought compatible. The KRYX had expected to exploit Earth's digital divide, the gap between technological haves and have-nots. Instead, they watched as communities adapted their level of technology to what worked best against the crystal invaders. While developed nations deployed advanced quantum countermeasures, villages in developing countries found that traditional ceramic firing techniques could produce materials that interfered with KRYX sensors. Perhaps most disturbing to the crystalline invaders was how human religion and science, often at odds, had found common ground. Tibetan monks discovered that their traditional mandala patterns, when properly scaled and deployed, could create psychological disruption in KRYX crystal matrices. Vatican astronomers contributed crucial observations about how KRYX ships interacted with solar radiation. They're accessing their entire species' knowledge base, Serix realized. Not just their modern technology, but everything their species has ever learned or created. They're turning their entire history into a weapon. The transformation of human society was moving faster than the KRYX could analyze. Every human institution was being repurposed for survival and resistance. Schools became innovation centers. Sports stadiums transformed into community defense hubs. Social media evolved from entertainment platforms into global tactical coordination networks. Even human entertainment was being weaponized. Gaming communities worldwide began running complex battle simulations, using their collective problem-solving skills to predict and counter KRYX strategies. Science fiction authors joined military think tanks, their imaginative scenarios helping to predict and prepare for possible KRYX technological developments. High Command must understand, Serix transmitted urgently. We are no longer fighting isolated human nations. We are fighting humanity as a single, rapidly evolving entity. Their chaos is becoming ordered, but not in ways we can predict or counter. The KRYX had believed that humanity's greatest weakness was its division into competing groups with different beliefs, technologies, and ways of life. Now they faced the terrifying reality that this diversity was actually humanity's greatest strength. Each human culture, each belief system, each level of technological development contributed unique solutions to the challenge of crystal warfare. As the third month of invasion progressed, Serix was forced to accept a troubling conclusion: the very pressure that should have shattered human civilization was instead forging it into something stronger and more unified than ever before. The KRYX's perfect crystalline empire, for the first time in its history, faced an enemy that grew stronger with each attack. We must reconsider our entire understanding of species development, Serix announced to their command staff. The human's disorganized, chaotic nature isn't a sign of primitiveness. It's a form of advancement we never imagined possible. But even as they spoke, humanity's unified resistance was entering a new phase. Earth's combined scientific community had begun to understand the fundamental nature of crystal technology itself, and with that understanding came the power to do more than just defend. They could now strike back. 3 months and 12 days into the invasion, humanity made a breakthrough that would change the course of the war. It came not from a major research facility or military installation, but from a small geology lab in Iceland, where scientists studying the KRYX's crystalline composition made a startling discovery. The results cannot be accurate, Sarix insisted, their crystalline form vibrating with denial as they reviewed the tactical reports. They cannot have discovered the resonance pattern. It's not possible with their level of technology. But they had. Dr. Elena Magnuson and her team had realized that the KRYX weren't simply using crystal technology, they were living crystals, grown and shaped over millennia of careful development. Their perfect, geometric forms were both their greatest strength and, as humanity now knew, their critical weakness. Like any crystal, Dr. Magnuson explained in a globally broadcast presentation, they can only grow in certain ways, can only adapt along predetermined patterns. We, as organic life, can grow in any direction. That's not our weakness, it's our strength. The KRYX watched in horror as humanity's united scientific community took this fundamental insight and ran with it. Within days, laboratories worldwide were developing what they called disruption seeds, specially engineered crystals that, when introduced into KRYX systems, would grow in organic, unpredictable patterns. They're corrupting our perfect symmetry, warned Defense Crystal Herix. Their artificial crystals are introducing chaos into our ordered systems. Our ships are beginning to show signs of irregularity. The human offensive began in earnest. The first wave consisted of modified weather balloons, releasing clouds of microscopic disruption seeds into the upper atmosphere. The KRYX ships, designed to absorb and channel energy in perfect geometric patterns, began to develop tiny imperfections as these seeds attached and grew in random formations. But humanity didn't stop there. They had learned from the KRYX's own entropy fields, developing what they called reverse entropy projectors, devices that didn't accelerate decay but instead accelerated chaotic growth. When these weapons struck KRYX vessels, crystals began growing in wild, organic patterns that disrupted the ship's carefully maintained structural integrity. They're not trying to destroy us, Sarix realized with growing dread. They're trying to change us. To introduce organic chaos into our perfect order. The effects were devastating. KRYX warriors, exposed to these weapons, found their crystalline forms developing irregular growths. Their perfect geometric shapes, maintained through millennia of careful cultivation, began to exhibit organic patterns. Ships that had once been perfect dodecahedrons developed spiral growths and asymmetric formations. Humanity's advantage wasn't just technological, it was philosophical. The KRYX had evolved to be perfect, unchanging crystals. Humans had evolved to be adaptable, to thrive in chaos, to grow stronger through imperfection. Now they were forcing the KRYX to confront the limitations of their own perfect nature. We cannot adapt to their weapons, Tactical Crystal Varix reported, their own form showing signs of irregular growth. Our patterns are fixed. We can only grow as we have always grown. But their attacks, they force us to grow differently. The human offensive pushed forward on all fronts. Naval ships equipped with sonic resonators forced KRYX vessels out of the oceans. Ground-based crystal disruptors made it impossible for KRYX forces to maintain cohesive formations. But the most effective attacks came from orbit, where hastily modified satellites broadcast interference patterns that disrupted the very frequency that held KRYX society together. They're not just defeating us, Sarix transmitted to High Command, their message tinged with static as their own crystalline form began to show signs of corruption. They're proving that our perfect evolution has become our greatest vulnerability. We cannot adapt, but they can force us to change. The KRYX Empire had never faced an enemy like this, one that didn't try to match their perfection but instead wielded imperfection as a weapon. Human scientists had turned their understanding of crystal growth into a tool for introducing chaos into the most ordered systems ever created. As the fourth month of invasion drew to a close, the KRYX fleet hung in orbit, their once perfect ships now twisted with organic growths. The carefully maintained geometric patterns of their formations had been disrupted beyond repair. Their crystalline technology, evolved over thousands of years to maintain perfect order, was being undone by forced exposure to chaos. We must retreat, Syrinx finally ordered, their own form barely maintaining its original shape. We cannot win against an enemy that turns our perfection against us. That uses our order to create chaos. That grows stronger through change while we can only maintain what we have always been. But even as the order was given, both humans and KRYX knew this was more than a military defeat. It was a fundamental clash between two forms of evolution, one that sought perfection through unchanging order, and one that found strength in constant adaptation. The crystal was shattering, not from brute force, but from being forced to confront the limitations of its own perfect nature. The departure of the KRYX fleet marked more than Earth's victory, it signaled a fundamental shift in galactic civilization. As their corrupted crystalline ships limped back toward their home systems, they left behind a changed universe. Word spread quickly through interstellar channels, the perfect empire had been defeated, not by superior technology or overwhelming force, but by something far more profound. The humans didn't just survive our invasion, Syrinx reported to the Crystal Confluence, their once perfect form now marked with organic spiral patterns. They forced us to confront the limitations of perfection itself. The impact rippled through galactic society. Other spacefaring races, who had long admired and feared the KRYX's crystalline perfection, began to study humanity with intense interest. They found a species that seemed to defy conventional evolution, one that grew stronger through adversity rather than being diminished by it. Earth, meanwhile, was transformed by victory. The global unity forged in crisis didn't dissolve with the KRYX's retreat. Instead, it evolved into something new. The worldwide networks created to share battle tactics became channels for sharing all forms of knowledge. The barriers between nations, cultures, and disciplines remained permeable, allowing ideas to flow freely across old boundaries. We thought their diversity was a weakness, reflected Analysis Crystal Merrick's, addressing a gathering of galactic scholars. We didn't understand that their chaos was a form of strength we couldn't comprehend. Every attempt to impose order on them only made them more adaptable. Humanity's approach to technology changed as well. The fusion of ancient wisdom with modern science, born of necessity during the invasion, became a new standard. Research facilities worldwide began incorporating multiple knowledge systems, recognizing that innovation could come from unexpected sources. Traditional healers worked alongside quantum physicists, their combined insights leading to breakthroughs neither group could have achieved alone. But perhaps the most profound change was in how humanity viewed itself. The species that had spent millennia fighting internal divisions had discovered a new kind of unity, not the rigid uniformity the KRYX had expected, but a dynamic harmony of differences. Each culture, each perspective, each level of technological development was recognized as a potential source of solutions to future challenges. The humans teach us that true advancement isn't about reaching perfection, Syrinx concluded in their final transmission before the KRYX empire began its long isolation. It's about maintaining the ability to change, to adapt, to grow in new directions when old patterns fail. The galaxy watched as humanity took its first steps into interstellar society. Other species, initially wary of these creatures who had defeated the undefeatable, found themselves drawn to human adaptability. Trade routes opened. Cultural exchanges began. The species that had been targeted for conquest became teachers, showing others that strength could be found in imperfection. The KRYX themselves underwent a painful transformation. Their society, built on the premise of achieving and maintaining perfect crystalline forms, had to confront the possibility that their evolutionary path had led them into a dead end. The organic growths forced upon them by human weapons didn't fade, they became reminders that even perfect crystals must sometimes adapt or shatter. Decades later, Earth's cities still bore marks of the invasion, but they weren't scars, they were monuments to adaptation. Crystal growths, carefully cultivated from captured KRYX technology, were integrated into new forms of architecture that blended geometric precision with organic flow. The entropy fields, once weapons of conquest, were repurposed into tools for environmental restoration. We are not the last of the perfect empire, Serex would write in their memoirs, now required reading in galactic universities. We are the first of whatever we will become. The humans taught us that evolution never truly ends, it only stagnates when we believe we have reached perfection. The legacy of Earth's victory echoed across space and time. Other would-be conquerors, studying the fate of the KRYX, learned to be wary not just of Earth's military capabilities, but of humanity's fundamental nature. The species that had seemed primitive and chaotic had proven that adaptability was the ultimate form of advancement. As humanity spread to the stars, they carried with them not just the technology they had developed to defeat the KRYX, but the philosophy that had made that victory possible. Their message to the galaxy was clear: true strength lies not in achieving perfection, but in maintaining the ability to change, to grow, to adapt to whatever challenges the universe presents. The KRYX became known as the last invaders not because they were the final species to attempt conquest, but because their defeat marked the end of an era in galactic history. They had proven that even the most perfect empire could be undone by a species that embraced chaos as a path to growth. And so the galaxy learned what the KRYX had discovered too late, that in the grand dance of evolution, it is better to be adaptable than perfect, better to grow through change than to maintain unchanging order. Humanity's victory became more than a military triumph, it became a lesson in the true nature of progress.